and a couple of things leading up to the midbrain, forming kind of a ridge on the top part of the fourth ventricle, is the superior cerebellar peduncle. That's a component of the midbrain. So after the cerebellum has received sensory information from my joints, and it's received motor information about what I'm going to do, it now adjusts that what I'm going to do part. So let's say I'm reaching for this eraser. And from the sensory joint perception and from my inner ear and balance and from my eyes, the cerebellum gets information that my current movement is going to send me too far. I'm going to overreach the eraser. So it will send information back up to the thalamus and cerebral cortex through the superior cerebellar peduncle to adjust that movement, to not extend quite as far. So we have this circuit. Incoming information to the cerebellum about what I'm going to do, where I am, and then outgoing back up to adjust that motor so I don't go quite so far or I need to go farther. So it completes that adjustment for coordination. Okay? So superior cerebellar peduncle is on the dorsal surface. It's this structure right here, part of the midbrain. In addition to that, we see 4 rounded structures, and the cranial gland from the hypothalamus is up here. These are known as the superior and inferior colliculi. So the top 2 set of rounded bodies is the superior colliculus. The bottom has 2 inferior colliculi. And all 4 together are known as the corpora quadrigemina. The superior colliculus receives input from the eye. So on the way to the thalamus, some of that information will go to the superior colliculus. And this is involved with visual reflexes. All right, so let's say that you're out to dinner with your husband or boyfriend or significant other, and you're sitting at a table. See, I haven't seen my husband for 3 weeks, and we're out to dinner, and he's gazing lovingly into my eyes, and I'm looking at him. But as I'm looking at him, somebody walks by my peripheral vision. And I turn my head, and I follow them as they go around. He's like, wait, I'm here. I'm sorry, that was my superior colliculus functioning. More important in frogs than in humans, all right, to help them catch food. But a sensory stimuli, usually of movement causing the eyeballs or the head to turn reflexively, is the role of the superior colliculus, all right? The cranial nerves going to the eyeball to move it are in the midbrain and pons, and so a sensory impulse coming from the eye to the superior colliculus will send a reflexive control to muscles to move the eyeball or the head, so you turn to follow. Inferior colliculus gets information from the ear, so that's auditory. You hear a sound, you turn your head so you can hear it better. Okay, so inferior colliculus is auditory reflexes. A wolf whistle, and you turn your head. All right, so those are found on the posterior surface of the midbrain. So here's the ventral view, and here would be the cerebral peduncles right here. They form a V, and the mammillary body is found inside that V. Here's the cerebral peduncles again. And on the posterior surface, we find the superior and inferior colliculi. The superior colliculus is huge in the sheep brain. So when we do our dissection on Thursday, you won't have any problem finding these 2 structures. So again, here's the fourth ventricle, superior cerebellar peduncle, the two superior caliculi and the two inferior caliculi. Okay, and the pineal gland right above them. So those are, they actually form the roof of the cerebral aqueduct. So we look at it, here's the cerebral aqueduct right here. All right, so let's look at a cross section of the colliculus. These first two bumps, depending on where we are, would be the superior or the inferior. Just depends on what level we cut. Okay, so what are the colliculi? And then we have the cerebral peduncles. At the base of the cerebral peduncle, we have the cells that are making the dopamine going up to the basal nuclei. And as a byproduct of that, they make melanin. And so this material is called the substantia nigra, black stuff. You can't put black stuff down in the lab, okay? That's what it means. So our descending motor pathway fibers will be going through the cerebral peduncle. Now, a couple of you have asked me what crus cerebri are. That's the actual ventral portion, which is carrying the motor fibers, but we're not going to worry about it. So you don't have to identify any structure as crus cerebri for lecture or lab. Just cerebral peduncle is fine. All right, so here is this entire structure is the cerebral peduncle, the substantia nigra. And this is something that we'll talk about on Tuesday. It's a motor pathway that starts with the red nucleus, so there's no voluntary function to it because it's below the cortex, but it helps us maintain our posture. Okay, so we'll talk about, on Tuesday next week, we'll talk about the rubrospinal pathway. Rubro, cell bodies come from here. Rubro meaning red. This is the red nucleus. So those cell bodies going down to the spinal column to help maintain your posture when you're not actually thinking about it, will have to do with this. So, rubronucleus. Now, I'm not going to show you a cross-section of the midbrain on a lab exam because we don't look at these in the microscope, but you will see it in this formation when we do the pathways on Tuesday, motor pathways, all right? So, and from this formation, you need to recognize regions, but not as a lab exam, okay? The lab material is external only. But I want you to recognize that the red nucleus is a component of the midbrain. And then we would have our central canal. One of the cranial nerves, you don't have to know this location, but since we're on this slide, one of the cranial nerves we're going to talk about after break is the ocular motor nucleus. This is ocular motor, ocular referring to eye, motor to eye movement. So here we have the colliculi that are involved with moving the eyeballs and reflexive response. So from the eyeball, we get sensory information to the superior colliculus. It doesn't have to go very far to activate the reflex to move your eyeball, okay? Because that's one of the cranial nerves involved in doing that. So we'll do those pathways on Tuesday and Friday. Friday and Tuesday. All right, let's finish up before break with the cerebellum, and then we'll take a 15-minute break, come back and do some of the cranial nerves, introduce them to you. Because on Thursday we haven't had a wet lab in a while. By wet lab I mean a hands-on lab where you do stuff and fill out a lab report. So we'll be testing some of the cranial nerves in lab on Thursday and figure out which nerve we're testing and what pathways are being used. So they're a little bit more meaningful to you. Because of anatomy, I found those of you that are interested in going on to nursing programs, nursing schools are really keenly interested when they look at our articulation and our curriculum. They want to make sure that you've covered the cranial nerves. I've had students in the past moving to other nursing schools, and in the interview they ask them specific questions about cranial nerves and what happens if a cranial nerve is cut, type of thing, because it's involved in the testing and awareness and the physical assessment of individuals. Okay, so we'll be doing some of those tests in lab on Thursday. So let's finish up brainstem with cerebellum. And the cerebellum, as you remember from the very beginning, I said grew out of the roof of the fourth ventricle. And it grows very, 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 very rapidly. Here's the cerebellum in this slide here. You guys remember two blood vessels that supply the cerebellum with oxygenated blood? Pica? Good. Posterior cerebral artery and posterior inferior cerebellar artery are going to be supplying the cerebellum. So we have two hemispheres, cerebellar hemispheres, and then we have this midline structure here known as the vermis. Okay? If we open up the cerebellum and look at it in cross-section, the white matter of the cerebellum is known as the arbor vitae. It means living tree. Somebody thought it looked like the branches or the roots of a plant, and so that's the arbor vitae. And then the last slide kind of puts in together the diagrams I've been talking about with the cerebellar peduncles. So we have a pair of cerebral peduncles and 3 pairs of cerebellar peduncles. All right? So here in blue are the inferior cerebellar peduncle fibers coming from joint sense, a pathway we'll talk about on Friday, and carries information to the cerebellum from your joints. Again, the cerebellum isn't a processing center. All right, we have to use our dorsal white column to know whether our joints are flexed or not. But that information is sent to the cerebellum. It's just not projected back to your joint. Okay? And then when we go to make of movement, descending fibers will come down and go to the pons, the pontine nuclei, and that will send some of that information to the cerebellum through the middle cerebellar peduncle. And then the cerebellum will associate that with information from your eye and your ear and send modification back up through the superior cerebellar peduncle to the thalamus, red nucleus, and to the cortex of the brain. In our next unit, when we talk about the eye in the ear, we'll be looking at the function of the inner ear for balance. So the cerebellum is doing balance and coordination. It's rapidly affected by alcohol, and alcohol is rapidly affected, absorbed across the lining of the stomach, more so than water, because alcohol is nonpolar covalent, as is your lipid membrane. Water is polar covalent, so it's not taken in at the stomach, has to move into the small intestine. And so the test that a CHP officer might do to assess effects of alcohol involve the cerebellum in coordination, counting backwards, walking heel to toe, touching your fingers to your nose, kind of thing. And the cerebellum has been known to argue. Again, an anthropomorphic term, because it doesn't form words, but it does control actions, and it will argue with the actions based, because it's a blind box. It can only base its output from what it gets inward. Okay? So when we do the ear, part of the ear is balance. And it's the vestibular portion of the ear. The cochlear portion is hearing. And we'll get to that when we do the ear. So if I had a glass of water with a piece of ice in it, and I started to swirl it like this, the water's going to swirl, but the ice, not yet. And after a while, the ice will catch up with the water as the water starts to push the ice, and they'll both be moving about the same speed as my glass is. As soon as I stop moving my glass, the water and the ice will continue to swirl for a while. All right? Inertia, or continuation of that. So I have fluid in my inner ear, and several components of my inner ear. When I start to spin, that fluid isn't moving as fast as my body is yet. And it causes neurofibers, receptors to bend at a different rate. Eventually, that spinning catches up, and when I stop moving, that fluid continues to spin. All right? And so it's sending information to my cerebellum that I'm still moving even though I'm not. And it's going to argue with information from my eye, saying, so my eyes are going to say, I'm looking here, and the cerebellum is going to say, no, you're over here, and my eyes are going to say, no, I'm here. And so my eye movement goes back and forth, and that's called nystagmus. Okay? When I reach out to touch an object, my brain is going to say, you're not there, my cerebellum, you're over here. It's going to try to move my arm to where it thinks I am. And it's going to make me move it past the point that I'm reaching for because it thinks that I'm still spinning. Think again is an answer. It's the wrong term because the cerebellum doesn't think. But it's going to process it as if I'm still thinking. Okay? So, I'm going to spin. Close my eyes. Hold on to the corner of the desk here to give me some direction. And spin fast enough and long enough that there's fluid in my inner ear. And I'm going to reach out and try to touch something. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to look at my eyes. Okay, see how my arm is moving over? Now watch my eyes. Those of you in the back, you may not be able to see them. See how it's switching back and forth? I'll do it again and look right in the camera. You can see it on my... I don't want to see this video. You've probably seen videos or seen people who used to do this for a department picnic. Yeah. Like there. And then you have a race. Okay? So that's my cerebellum causing my eyeballs to move, and then my cortex is getting information from my eye, and so they're quote unquote arguing back and forth.
So then what's vertigo?
Vertigo is the sensation. Is that happening on its own? For balance, you need two of three things. You need the proprioception from your joints, inner ear, and there's a spinning part of the inner ear, and there's just the tilting balance, and then there's the eyes. If you have two of those three, you can maintain your balance. Okay? If you're blind and you get inner ear infection, you're going to lose your balance. All right? So vertigo is a sense of spinning or a sense of falling from usually the cerebellum getting wrong information from the inner ear. So you can get an infection or some other aspect, so the information is coming to the cerebellum that's false, and you get that. So you've probably all, been asleep or half asleep in bed, and you get that feeling that you're falling kind of a thing. So just like you can have a smell that's not there yet, or a memory of something that happens, that can refire and send information to the cerebellum that's not actually coming from its stimulus, from its receptor.
Like if you're running or going in a direction for a while, and then you stop, and it seems like everything's moving now
Still
back
moving?
the other way.
I don't ever run that fast, but that's what happened in the car.
What is that? Where it's
So what she's talking about is like if you're sitting in a car and the car beside you starts to move, all of a sudden you get that feeling that your car is rolling. Yeah. Okay? It's what the cerebellum is doing is using visual information and comparing it to what it already knows. And if something is moving and it's interpreting it the wrong way. So you've stopped moving, but it makes it seem like those other structures are still getting to the fluid response of those inner ear structures that will cover, they form a vestibule and semicircular canals that we'll cover in our next unit. Okay? So whatever is false is real, and whatever is real is false, and kind of component. All right, but that's what I want you to understand with the cerebellum. Now, with Parkinson's disease and basal nuclei, we talked about unintentional tremors. So you would sit there, you'd have this tremor, usually caused by damage to globus pallidus. But when you actually go to do something, the tremor disappears. Okay? Basal nuclei damage. Intentional tremor is you're fine when you're not moving, but you go to do something, and the more you try to concentrate on it, the worse the tremor gets. That's an intentional tremor. That's damage to the cerebellum. okay? Because it normally coordinates your movement and smooths it out. And if it can't smooth it out, it just gets worse and worse and worse as it's trying to adjust your movement, but it's not able to do so. And you overreach or underreach, and you go back and forth between those. All right, so that's the end of brainstem and cerebellum. And then the cranial nerves go into or come out of parts of the brainstem, so we're going to continue with those. And I want to do a few of them today, and then we'll finish up on Thursday. Okay? So, why don't you come back at about